Dr. Emily Carter wiped the sweat from her forehead as she hurried through the narrow metal corridors of Mining Station Delta 7. The artificial gravity felt heavier today, or maybe it was just the weight of another 14-hour shift treating miners with lung infections and broken bones. Her medical bag bounced against her leg with each quick step, the familiar sound somehow comforting in the endless hum of machinery that never stopped on this remote outpost. The emergency call had come through her comm device just as she was finally sitting down to eat her first real meal in 8 hours. Security Chief Jake Morrison's voice had been tense, which was unusual for the normally calm ex-military man. "Doc, we need you in Waste Sector 7. Got a situation with some kind of animal. Might be dangerous." Emily had grabbed her kit without hesitation. In 3 years of working on frontier mining stations, she had learned that "might be dangerous" usually meant definitely dangerous, but we don't want to panic anyone. The Outer Rim stations attracted all kinds of trouble, from pirates to exotic diseases, but this was the first time anyone had mentioned an animal. The waste sector was the least pleasant part of an already unpleasant station. Massive recycling units churned and ground constantly, breaking down everything from food scraps to worn-out mining equipment. The air tasted metallic and stale, and the lighting was dim to save power. Emily had only been down here once before, when a maintenance worker had gotten his arm caught in a processor. She found Jake standing near a pile of discarded mining gear, his hand resting on the grip of his plasma pistol. 2 other security officers flanked him, their weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. All 3 men were staring at something behind the equipment pile, and Emily could see tension in every line of their bodies. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Emily asked, setting down her medical bag and pulling out her scanner. "See for yourself," Jake replied quietly, stepping aside to give her a clear view. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Behind the discarded machinery lay the most beautiful and heartbreaking creature she had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a small horse but built like a massive cat, with 6 powerful legs that ended in retractable claws. Its fur was a stunning silver color with darker stripes that seemed to shimmer and shift in the poor lighting, almost like looking at moonlight on water. But what made Emily's heart ache was the obvious suffering in those incredible amber eyes. The creature's breathing was labored and shallow, and she could see strange lumps moving beneath its skin like something alive was crawling around inside. Despite its pain, those intelligent eyes tracked her every movement with an alertness that spoke of a mind far more complex than any simple animal. "The Altarian trade delegation left 3 days ago," Jake explained, never taking his eyes off the creature. "Found this thing about an hour after their ship departed. Been getting worse ever since." Emily had heard of the Altarians but never seen one in person. They were one of the few alien species that bothered trading with human settlements this far out. Most aliens considered humans too primitive or unpredictable to deal with, but the Altarians were apparently willing to trade advanced technology for the rare minerals that human miners seemed exceptionally good at finding. "So they just left it here?" Emily asked, pulling out her medical scanner and slowly approaching the creature. "Just abandoned it in the waste sector?" "Looks that way," Jake replied grimly. "Thing's obviously dying. Document. We should put it out of its misery before it gets aggressive." Emily knelt slowly about 10 feet from the creature, making sure to keep her movements calm and non-threatening. The scanner in her hands beeped softly as it began analyzing the alien biology in front of her. What she saw on the small screen made her stomach turn. The creature was in agony. Whatever was moving under its skin had spread throughout its body, and the bio-readings showed massive inflammation in what appeared to be its nervous system. But despite the obvious pain, the creature made no aggressive moves toward her. Instead, it simply watched her with those haunting amber eyes that seemed to hold a desperate kind of hope. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" Emily whispered, more to herself than to the creature. "You're just scared and hurting." The creature made a soft sound, almost like a whimper, and Emily felt her heart break a little more. This was clearly an intelligent being, not some mindless animal. Whatever the Altarians had used it for, they had abandoned it to die alone in the worst part of the station. "Doc, I really think we should step back," Jake warned. "That thing could snap at any moment." But Emily was already moving closer, her scanner providing more detailed readings with each step. The creature's vital signs were weak but stable, and more importantly, it showed no signs of preparing to attack. If anything, it seemed to be trying to make itself appear smaller and less threatening. "Give me 48 hours, Emily said quietly, not taking her eyes off the creature. "What?" Jake asked, clearly surprised by the request. 48 hours, Emily repeated, finally looking back at the security chief. "If I can't help it, then we'll discuss other options." But I won't put down an intelligent being without at least trying to save it. Jake shook his head slowly. Emily, this isn't some injured minor. We don't know anything about this creature or what it's capable of. For all we know, those things moving under its skin could be contagious. Emily had already considered that possibility, but her scanner wasn't detecting any airborne pathogens or dangerous radiation. Whatever was wrong with the creature seemed to be contained to its own body. More importantly, every instinct she had developed as a doctor was telling her that this being deserved a chance. 48 hours, Jake. That's all I'm asking for. The security chief studied her face for a long moment, then looked back at the creature. It hadn't moved from its position behind the equipment, hadn't shown any aggression despite having 4 armed humans staring at it. Finally, Jake holstered his weapon. 48 hours, document. But if that thing shows even a hint of dangerous behavior, it's my call. Emily nodded, already planning her next steps. She would need to set up a temporary medical station here in the waste sector, run comprehensive scans, and somehow figure out how to treat an alien species that nobody had bothered to study. The smart thing would be to contact the Altarian delegation and ask for medical information about the creature. But as she looked into those intelligent amber eyes again, Emily suspected that the Altarians wouldn't be much help. After all, they were the ones who had abandoned this magnificent being to die alone in the dark. Emily spent the entire night setting up a makeshift medical station in the waste sector. She dragged in portable scanners, medical equipment, and even a small generator to power everything properly. The creature, which she had started calling Titan in her mind, watched every movement with those piercing amber eyes but never once showed any sign of aggression. By morning, Emily had managed only 2 hours of sleep on a folding cot she had brought down. Her assistant, David Kim, arrived with coffee and a concerned expression on his young face. David was fresh out of medical school and still adjusting to life on the frontier stations, but he was eager to learn and never complained about the long hours. Any change overnight? David asked, handing Emily a steaming cup of synthetic coffee that tasted like burnt metal but contained enough caffeine to wake the dead. He's been watching me all night, Emily replied, gesturing toward Titan. Never sleeps, just keeps those eyes on me. I think he knows we're trying to help. David unpacked the additional scanning equipment he had brought down from the main medical bay. The readings from yesterday don't look good, Emily. Whatever those things are under his skin, they're spreading fast. Emily pulled up the scan results on her portable display screen. What she saw made her stomach clench with worry. The parasitic organisms had formed complex networks throughout Titan's body, but they seemed to be concentrated in his nervous system. The things were literally eating away at his brain and spinal cord while somehow keeping him alive and conscious. Look at this, she said, pointing to a section of the scan that showed Titan's brain activity. These parasites aren't just randomly destroying tissue. They're following specific neural pathways, almost like they know exactly what they're doing. David leaned in to study the readings more closely. That's impossible. Parasites don't have that kind of intelligence. These ones do, Emily replied grimly. And according to my analysis, the infestation is at 89% progression. In human medicine, anything over 60% is considered terminal. She had spent hours researching similar cases in Earth's medical databases, but nothing came close to what Titan was suffering through. The closest comparison was a rare brain fungus that affected certain mammals, but even that was child's play compared to what these alien parasites were doing. I managed to get some information from the Altarian medical databases, David said, pulling up a new file on his tablet. But Emily, you're not going to like what I found. The translated documents painted an even bleaker picture than Emily had feared. The creatures like Titan were called Nexari in the Altarian language, which roughly translated to noble guardians. They had been bred and trained by Altarian society for thousands of years to serve as protectors and companions for important families. But the documents revealed a darker side to this relationship. When a Nexari became infected with what the Altarians called mind-eaters, they were immediately considered worthless. No Altarian doctor had ever attempted to treat the condition, because their society viewed the infected creatures as already dead. According to this, David said, scrolling through pages of cold, clinical text, a Nexari typically dies within 4 to 6 days of showing symptoms. The parasites consume the entire nervous system, but they keep the host conscious and aware throughout the entire process. Emily felt sick to her stomach. The idea that an entire civilization could be so callous toward creatures that had served them loyally was almost too much to bear. But worse than that was the medical reality staring her in the face. Every single case mentioned in these files ended in death, David continued quietly. Emily, their own doctors, with technology centuries ahead of ours, consider this completely incurable. The parasites adapt too quickly to any treatment. Emily walked over to Titan's makeshift enclosure and knelt down near the transparent barrier she had erected. The massive creature lifted his head slightly, those intelligent amber eyes focusing on her face. Despite his pain, despite the horror of what was happening to his body, Titan seemed to draw some small comfort from her presence. "Has anyone ever tried a direct surgical approach?" Emily asked without taking her eyes off Titan. David checked the records again. No. The Altarians rely heavily on nanotechnology and genetic manipulation for their medicine. Physical surgery is considered primitive and unreliable. What about targeted electromagnetic therapy? Nothing in their records. Their medical philosophy seems to focus on chemical and technological solutions. Emily stood up and began pacing around the small medical station. Her mind was racing through possibilities, considering approaches that might never have occurred to the advanced Altarian doctors. Sometimes being primitive had its advantages. These parasites have evolved over thousands of years to counter Altarian medical technology, she said, thinking out loud. They've developed defenses against every treatment the Altarians have ever tried. Right? David agreed. Which is why their doctors gave up trying. But they've never encountered human medicine, Emily continued, her voice growing more excited. They've never been exposed to Earth-based antibiotics, surgical techniques, or treatment approaches. David looked skeptical. Emily, our medical technology is centuries behind theirs. If they can't cure this with their advanced equipment, how could we possibly succeed with our basic tools? Emily stopped pacing and turned to face her assistant. Because sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective. These parasites are like a computer virus that's been programmed to counter specific security systems. But what happens when you introduce them to a completely different operating system? She pulled up the detailed scans of Titan's nervous system and began highlighting specific areas where the parasites had formed colonies. Look at their behavior patterns. They're following Altarian neural mapping, using pathways that Altarian doctors would predict. But human neural surgery follows different principles entirely. You're talking about brain surgery on an alien species we know nothing about, David said, his voice filled with concern. Emily, one wrong move could kill him instantly. He's going to die anyway, Emily replied quietly, watching as another wave of pain rippled through Titan's body. The question is whether we let him die without trying, or whether we give him a fighting chance. Station Administrator Lisa Grant arrived at that moment, having heard about Emily's plan through the station's gossip network. Lisa was a practical woman who had managed frontier installations for over a decade, and she knew how to balance compassion with reality. Emily, I understand your desire to help, Lisa said gently, but we need to consider the risks. If something goes wrong during surgery, if the creature becomes violent, or if those parasites somehow spread to humans. The scans show no indication that the parasites can survive in human biology, Emily interrupted. And Titan has shown no aggressive behavior despite being in constant pain. But you're talking about attempting something that an entire civilization of advanced doctors considers impossible, Lisa argued. What makes you think you can succeed where they've failed? Emily looked at Titan again, watching the way his breathing had become more labored over just the past few hours. Time was running out and she could see in his eyes that he knew it too. Because I'm willing to try, she said simply. Because I refuse to accept that a sentient being should suffer and die just because someone else has decided it's hopeless. The room fell silent except for the constant hum of machinery and Titan's increasingly difficult breathing. Emily knew that everyone thought she was attempting the impossible, but she also knew that she couldn't live with herself if she didn't at least try to save him. Emily barely slept for the next 36 hours. Her small workspace in the waste sector had transformed into something that looked more like a mad scientist's laboratory than a proper medical facility. Cables snaked across the floor connecting various pieces of equipment she had borrowed, traded for, or simply taken from other departments on the station. David brought her meals that she barely touched, too focused on the puzzle in front of her to remember basic human needs like eating. The key breakthrough came when she stopped trying to think like an Altarian doctor and started thinking like a human veterinarian from Earth. Back in medical school, she had spent a summer working at a wildlife rescue center, treating everything from injured hawks to bears with parasitic infections. The approach had always been direct and practical, using whatever tools were available to solve the immediate problem. Look at this, Emily said to David, pointing at the latest scan of Titan's neural system. The Altarians have been approaching this all wrong. They're trying to use chemical compounds and nanotechnology to fight the parasites systemically, treating the whole body at once. David leaned over her shoulder to study the display. That makes sense though. Hit everything simultaneously so the parasites can't adapt or escape to other areas. But that's exactly why it doesn't work, Emily explained, her voice growing excited as the pieces fell into place. These parasites have evolved to counter that approach. They've developed communication networks that let them share information about threats and adapt in real time. She zoomed in on a cluster of parasites near Titan's brain stem. See how they're connected? They're literally talking to each other through bioelectrical signals. When Altarian medicine attacks one colony, the others learn from that experience and develop defenses. So what are you thinking? David asked, though he already had a suspicion about where Emily's mind was heading. Manual extraction, Emily replied simply. One colony at a time, using microsurgical techniques to physically remove them before they can communicate the threat to the others. David's face went pale. Emily, that would require mapping his entire nervous system in real time while performing surgery. The complexity alone would be impossible, not to mention the risk of causing permanent brain damage. Emily was already pulling up surgical planning software on her computer. Not impossible. Difficult, dangerous, and requiring more precision than any surgery I've ever attempted, but not impossible. She had spent hours studying the electromagnetic signatures of the parasites, discovering something that the advanced Altarian scanners had apparently missed. Each parasite colony generated a unique frequency pattern, almost like a fingerprint. If she could track those patterns during surgery, she could locate and remove the colonies without having to guess where they were hiding. The parasites use electromagnetic communication, she continued, pulling up another screen that showed frequency analysis. But they've never encountered Earth-based surgical techniques combined with targeted electromagnetic disruption. Emily's plan was audacious in its simplicity. While the Altarians had relied on automated systems and nanotechnology, she would use her own hands and eyes, guided by real-time electromagnetic mapping. It was like the difference between using a computer-controlled robot and a skilled craftsman with traditional tools. I'll need to modify the surgical scanner to track electromagnetic frequencies in real time, she said, already making notes on her tablet. And I'll need to synthesize some Earth-based antibiotics that these parasites have never been exposed to. David watched her work with a mixture of admiration and terror. Emily, even if the surgical approach works, you're talking about operating on an alien brain. We don't know how his nervous system responds to anesthesia, or if his body can handle that kind of trauma. I've been studying his vital signs for 3 days, Emily replied, pulling up Titan's medical charts. His physiology is surprisingly similar to Earth mammals in many ways. The major difference is the 6-limb structure and some variations in brain chemistry, but the basic neural architecture follows patterns we understand. She had also noticed something else during her observations. Titan seemed to respond positively to her presence, his vital signs stabilizing whenever she was nearby. It was as if he understood that she was trying to help him, which suggested a level of intelligence and emotional awareness that might actually work in their favor during surgery. Station Administrator Lisa Grant arrived just as Emily was beginning to set up the modified surgical equipment. Lisa took one look at the complex array of machines and shook her head slowly. Emily, this looks like something out of a science fiction movie. Are you absolutely sure about this? No, Emily admitted honestly. I'm not sure about anything. But I know that if we don't try, Titan dies for certain. At least this way he has a chance. She had also been working on something else, a backup plan that no Altarian doctor would have considered. Emily had synthesized a cocktail of Earth-based antibiotics, modified to work with Titan's alien biology. The compounds were derived from common Earth fungi and bacteria that the parasites would have never encountered in their evolutionary history. The antibiotics alone won't cure him, Emily explained as she prepared the various solutions. But they should weaken the parasites and make them easier to remove surgically. It's like hitting them with weapons they don't know how to defend against. David helped her run final tests on all the equipment. What if the parasites adapt to the antibiotics during surgery? They might, Emily acknowledged. But adaptation takes time, and the surgical removal should be faster than their ability to develop new defenses. Plus, I'm planning to use multiple different antibiotic compounds in sequence, which should keep them off balance. The most challenging part of the preparation was modifying the electromagnetic scanner to work as a real-time surgical guide. Emily had to essentially rebuild the device's software to track multiple frequency signatures simultaneously while providing clear visual guidance for microsurgery. This is completely untested technology, David warned as he helped calibrate the scanner. Everything we're doing is untested, Emily replied. That's what makes it potentially effective. As evening approached, Emily made her final preparations. She had calculated that Titan had perhaps 12 hours left before the parasite infestation reached a point where even successful surgery couldn't save him. His breathing had become increasingly labored, and she could see that the effort of staying conscious was taking an enormous toll on his body. "I need to ask you something," Emily said to David as they finished setting up the surgical suite. "This procedure is going to take at least 12 hours, possibly longer. I need someone I can trust to assist me, someone who won't panic if things go wrong." David nodded without hesitation. "I'm with you, Emily. Whatever it takes." Emily walked over to Titan's enclosure and knelt down beside him. The massive creature lifted his head slightly, those amber eyes focusing on her face with what seemed like understanding. She reached through the barrier and gently touched the fur around his ears, the first physical contact she had made with him. "Hey, big guy," she whispered. "I know you're scared and I know you're in pain. But I'm going to try to help you, okay? I need you to trust me and keep fighting." Titan made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and pressed his head slightly against her hand. In that moment, Emily felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This magnificent, intelligent being was placing his life in her hands, trusting her to accomplish something that an entire advanced civilization had declared impossible. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to find out if human stubbornness can beat alien technology," she said quietly, as much to herself as to Titan. The surgery would either save his life or end it, but either way, Emily was determined that Titan wouldn't die alone and abandoned like the Altarians had intended. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she made the first incision. The modified anesthetic had worked better than she had dared hope, and Titan's vital signs remained stable as she began the most complex surgery of her career. David stood beside her, monitoring the electromagnetic scanner that would guide them through the maze of parasites hiding throughout Titan's nervous system. "First colony located," David announced quietly, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. 2 centimeters behind the left frontal lobe, frequency signature matching the primary pattern. Emily adjusted her position and peered through the high-powered surgical microscope. The parasite colony appeared as a dark, writhing mass about the size of a grape, its tendrils wrapped around several major neural pathways. She had practiced this exact procedure dozens of times on computer simulations, but seeing the real thing made her stomach clench with nervous energy. "Beginning extraction of Colony 1, she murmured, more for the recording than for David's benefit. Every moment of this surgery would be documented, partly for medical records and partly because no human had ever attempted anything like this before. The microsurgical tools felt familiar in her hands despite the alien biology she was working with. Emily had always been good with delicate work, a skill that had served her well during her residency at the trauma center on Mars Colony. But this was different. One wrong move could sever connections that might never heal, leaving Titan permanently brain damaged even if she successfully removed all the parasites. The first extraction took 47 minutes. Emily worked with painstaking care, using microforceps to grasp individual parasite tendrils and slowly unwrap them from the surrounding neural tissue. The creatures seemed almost reluctant to let go, clinging to their host with a determination that felt almost malicious. "Colony 1 removed successfully," Emily announced as she placed the writhing mass into a containment unit. "Neural pathways appear intact. Moving to Colony 2. But as they progressed to the second parasite cluster, something unexpected happened. The electromagnetic scanner began picking up increased activity from the remaining colonies scattered throughout Titan's brain. The parasites were definitely communicating with each other, somehow sharing information about the threat they were facing. "Emily, look at this," David said, pointing to the frequency analysis on his screen. "The remaining parasites are changing their bioelectrical patterns. They're adapting already." Emily paused her work and studied the readings. The parasites were indeed learning from the successful removal of the first colony, but not in the way she had expected. Instead of developing new defenses, they seemed to be trying to hide deeper within the neural tissue, making themselves harder to detect and remove. "They're going deeper," she realized. "They're trying to make themselves essential to his brain functions so we can't remove them without causing permanent damage." This was the scenario Emily had feared most. If the parasites could embed themselves deeply enough into critical brain functions, removing them would be like trying to take out pieces of Titan's memory and personality. But she also noticed something else in the scanner readings that gave her hope. "David, look at the metabolic indicators. The parasites are using enormous amounts of energy to adapt and relocate. They're burning through their reserves." It was true. The stress of adapting to Emily's surgical approach was taking a toll on the parasites themselves. They had evolved to counter Altarian medical technology, but the constant need to respond to her manual extraction methods was wearing them down. The antibiotics are working too, David observed, checking the blood analysis. Their cellular integrity is starting to break down. Emily had timed the antibiotic treatment to work in conjunction with the surgery, weakening the parasites just enough to make them easier to remove without killing Titan's healthy tissue. It was a delicate balance that required constant monitoring and adjustment. By the 6th hour of surgery, Emily had successfully removed 8 parasite colonies, but her hands were beginning to shake from exhaustion. The microsurgical work required absolute precision, and any tremor could be disastrous. David noticed her fatigue and suggested taking a break. "I can't stop," Emily replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "His body is handling the surgery well right now, but if we pause and restart, the stress might be too much." She pushed through the exhaustion, drawing on reserves of determination she didn't know she possessed. This wasn't just about proving that human medicine could succeed where Altarian technology had failed. This was about saving the life of a magnificent, intelligent being who had been abandoned to die alone. The real breakthrough came during the 9th hour, when Emily reached a massive parasite colony that had wrapped itself around Titan's brain stem. This was the mother colony, the central hub that had been coordinating the entire infestation. Removing it successfully would essentially decapitate the parasite network and make the remaining colonies much easier to eliminate. "This is the big one," Emily announced, studying the complex tangle of parasite tendrils that had invaded some of Titan's most critical neural pathways. "If we can get this one out, the others should be much more manageable." But as she began the delicate process of unwrapping the colony from the brain stem, Titan's vital signs suddenly spiked. His heart rate jumped to dangerous levels, and his brain activity showed signs of severe distress. "Emily, his pressure is dropping," David warned, monitoring the life support systems. "We're losing him." For a terrifying moment, Emily thought they had pushed too far. The main colony was fighting back, releasing toxins that were causing Titan's body to shut down. His breathing became irregular, and the surgical monitors began emitting urgent warning sounds. "Come on, Titan," Emily whispered, her hands never pausing in their careful work. "Don't give up on me now. We're almost there." She made a split-second decision that went against everything she had learned in medical school. Instead of stopping to stabilize Titan's vital signs, she accelerated the extraction process, working faster than she ever had before. If the main colony was killing him anyway, their only chance was to remove it completely before his body shut down entirely. The next few minutes felt like hours. Emily's hands moved with surgical precision while David managed the life support systems, manually stimulating Titan's heart when it threatened to stop completely. The electromagnetic scanner showed the main colony finally beginning to separate from the brain stem, its death throes causing wild fluctuations in the readings. "Got it," Emily announced as she finally extracted the massive parasite cluster. "Main colony removed. David, how are his vitals?" "Stabilizing," David replied, relief evident in his voice. Heart rate coming down, brain activity returning to normal patterns. With the main colony gone, the remaining parasites seemed to lose their coordination. Emily was able to remove the final 6 colonies in just 2 hours, each extraction easier than the last as the parasite network collapsed. By the 15th hour of surgery, she was removing the final traces of the infestation from Titan's peripheral nervous system. "Last colony removed," Emily announced, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Beginning neural pathway repair and final antibiotic treatment." The repair work took another 4 hours, during which Emily carefully reconnected neural pathways that had been damaged by the parasites. It was delicate work that required her to essentially rewire portions of Titan's brain, but the alien nervous system proved remarkably adaptable to her techniques. When Emily finally stepped back from the surgical table, 19 hours had passed since she had made the first incision. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, and her vision was blurry from staring through the microscope for so long. But the electromagnetic scanner showed no trace of parasite activity, and Titan's vital signs were stronger than they had been since she first found him. "David," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what the monitors were telling her. "I think we did it. I think we actually saved him." As if responding to her voice, Titan's eyes fluttered open for the first time since the surgery began. Those beautiful amber eyes were clear and alert, free from the pain that had haunted them for days. He made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and Emily felt tears streaming down her face. "Hey there, big guy," she whispered, gently stroking the fur around his ears. Welcome back. 3 weeks after the surgery, Emily sat in her small office reviewing patient files when she heard a familiar sound from the medical bay. The deep, rumbling purr that had become Titan's way of greeting her each morning echoed through the corridors, followed by the gentle thud of 6 massive paws padding across the metal floor. Emily smiled and looked up from her computer screen just as Titan's enormous head appeared in her doorway. His silver fur had regained its lustrous shine, and his amber eyes sparkled with intelligence and contentment. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been a dying creature abandoned in the waste sector, now stood a magnificent predator in perfect health. "Morning, big guy," Emily said, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. Titan pressed his massive head against her hand and purred even louder, a sound that never failed to warm her heart. David Kim walked in carrying his usual morning coffee and tablet full of patient reports. Over the past 3 weeks, he had grown completely comfortable around Titan, though he still marveled at the creature's size and grace. "Station Administrator Grant wants to see you," David said, handing Emily a message pad. Something about an urgent communication from the Altarian delegation. Emily's stomach tightened slightly. She had been dreading this moment since Titan's recovery. The Altarians had left their Nexary to die, but that didn't mean they would be happy about humans interfering with their property. 20 minutes later, Emily walked into the main communication center with Titan padding silently beside her. The massive creature rarely left her side these days, as if he understood that she had saved his life and wanted to stay close to his savior. Administrator Lisa Grant stood beside the main view screen, her expression unreadable. "Emily, the Altarian trade delegation has returned. They're requesting immediate boarding permission to reclaim their property." "Their property?" Emily asked, instinctively placing a protective hand on Titan's massive shoulder. "You mean Titan? The creature they abandoned 3 weeks ago?" "Yes." Lisa's voice carried a hint of disapproval. "Apparently word has reached them about his recovery and they want him back." Emily felt anger rising in her chest. "They left him here to die. They don't get to change their minds just because I managed to save him." The view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of an Altarian vessel. The aliens were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Their leader, who wore elaborate robes indicating high rank, stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Veltar of the Altarian Medical Council," the figure announced in accented but fluent English. "We have come to retrieve our Nexary and to investigate the illegal medical procedures performed upon him." "Illegal?" Emily stepped forward, her protective instincts fully aroused. "I saved his life when you abandoned him to die." Ambassador Veltar's expression remained coldly neutral. "The creature was infected with mind-eaters, a condition that is medically terminal. Our protocols require immediate disposal to prevent suffering." "Your protocols are wrong," Emily replied firmly. "As you can see, he's completely healthy and has made a full recovery." For the first time, the ambassador's composure cracked slightly. His large eyes focused on Titan with what appeared to be genuine shock. "This is impossible. No Nexary has ever survived mind-eater infestation. Our greatest medical minds have attempted treatment for centuries without success." "Maybe your greatest medical minds were thinking about the problem the wrong way," Emily replied. "Sometimes the simplest approach works better than the most advanced technology." The ambassador stared at Titan in obvious disbelief. The massive creature stood calmly beside Emily, showing no interest in his former owners. When Ambassador Veltar spoke in the Altarian language, presumably calling to the Nexary, Titan didn't even turn his head. "How?" the ambassador asked quietly. "How did you accomplish what we could not?" Emily spent the next hour explaining her treatment approach, from the manual surgical extraction to the use of Earth-based antibiotics that the Parasites had never encountered. The ambassador listened with growing amazement, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed just how revolutionary Emily's methods were compared to Altarian medical practices. "Your approach is so primitive," the ambassador said, though his tone suggested fascination rather than insult. "Physical removal with manual tools, chemical compounds from your home planet, surgical techniques that rely on individual skill rather than automated systems." "Sometimes primitive works," Emily replied. "Sometimes caring more about the patient than about following established protocols makes all the difference." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Altarian vessel. Another crew member appeared on the screen, speaking rapidly in their native language. Ambassador Veltar's expression grew increasingly surprised as he listened. "It appears," the ambassador said slowly, that news of your impossible cure has already reached the galactic medical community. We are receiving requests for information from dozens of species about your treatment methods. Emily felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She had been so focused on saving Titan that she hadn't considered the broader implications of her success. Over the next several hours, communication requests flooded in from across the galaxy. The Centaurian Collective wanted to know if Emily's methods could help with a degenerative brain condition that was affecting their hive minds. The Zephyrian Empire asked about treating a parasitic plague that had been devastating their outer colonies for decades. Species that Emily had never even heard of were requesting consultations on medical cases their own doctors had declared hopeless. "Dr. Carter," Administrator Grant said as they reviewed the growing list of requests, "you've become something of a celebrity in interstellar medical circles. Everyone wants to know how a human doctor with primitive technology succeeded where advanced alien medicine failed." Emily looked down at Titan, who was lying contentedly beside her chair. "I didn't do anything special. I just refused to give up on him when everyone else had written him off." But even as she said it, Emily began to understand what was really happening. Humanity's approach to medicine was fundamentally different from that of other galactic civilizations. While aliens relied on advanced technology and rigid protocols, humans combined scientific knowledge with emotional investment and creative problem-solving. "The Altarians are requesting that you accompany them back to their home system," David said, reading from his tablet. "They want you to teach their doctors your surgical techniques. And the Centaurians are offering to pay for a full research facility if you'll work on their hive mind degeneration problem," Administrator Grant added. Emily felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. 3 weeks ago, she had been just another frontier doctor treating miners with broken bones and lung infections. Now she was apparently representing humanity's approach to impossible medical cases. The decision about what to do next was made easier when Ambassador Veltar formally relinquished all Altarian claims to Titan. "It is clear," he said solemnly, "that the Nexari has chosen his new companion. In our culture, such bonds are sacred and cannot be broken by legal ownership." Titan had indeed made his choice clear. When the Altarians had boarded the station to examine him, he had shown no recognition or interest in his former owners. Instead, he remained pressed against Emily's side, making it obvious where his loyalty now lay. Emily accepted her first consultation case that same day, a request from a mining colony dealing with a crystalline infection that was slowly turning their workers into living statues. The condition had baffled doctors from 3 different species, all of whom had declared it incurable. "Ready for our next impossible case?" Emily asked Titan as they prepared to board the transport ship that would take them to their new assignment. Titan purred and nuzzled her shoulder, his amber eyes bright with intelligence and trust. Together, they walked toward a future where humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat would challenge the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. Word of Emily's success continued to spread throughout the interstellar community. Human medical techniques, once dismissed as primitive and unreliable, were suddenly being studied and respected. Other human doctors began receiving their own consultation requests, as the galaxy discovered that sometimes the best approach to impossible problems was the simple human willingness to care enough to try. Emily's story became a symbol of humanity's place in the galactic community, not as the most technologically advanced species, but as the ones who refused to abandon hope when others had given up. In a universe filled with ancient civilizations and incredible technologies, humanity had found its niche through the simple act of caring and the stubborn determination to keep fighting when everyone else said it was hopeless.